It's a Media Day Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael Cole and I are here with you, excited to talk about things we expect to hear and not to hear from the Memphis coaches and staff and players. Plus, we're going to talk about Vince Williams Jr. being out due to injury. The Grizzlies continue to be snake bit. And on Friday, Damichael talked about Marcus Smart, the backup point guard, a little bit. I'm going to question whether or not it's smart to bet on Marcus in that way. See what I did there? Yeah, if you didn't, that's okay. We got a whole episode of fun puns ahead on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is the end of September. We are almost at October, and you know what that means. It is NBA Media Day, training camp time here on Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He has a busy week ahead of himself covering the Grizzlies there for the Commercial Appeal, award-winning beat writer, I should add. And I am excited to follow all of his coverage over at the Commercial Appeal, and hopefully you are excited to follow us all week long as we break it all down for you here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, literally anywhere you can get a podcast. You can get Locked On Grizzlies as the calendar turns from September to October. NBA basketball is coming back, and hopefully your attention to the Memphis Grizzlies comes back since the team no longer will be, barring some unforeseen disaster, playing the likes of Timmy Allen. No disrespect to Timmy Allen, but on a team that's trying to win basketball games, Timmy Allen's probably not logging a ton of minutes, but I digress. And there's my one, I digress, and I'm 2 minutes into the episode.
We got it out the way early today. Okay.
Woo! Yeah, I gotta be careful the rest of the way.
Second segment's going to test you.
Yes, that's exactly right. Damichael, you had a great show on Friday, and we'll talk more about one of the main topics of that episode, the way they address the backup point guard situation now that Derrick Rose is officially retired. Before we get to that, though, there was more news that came out, the continued bad juju health-wise for the Memphis Grizzlies. Vince Williams Jr. now gets the medical update treatment, whether it's a media update email. I'm still on that email thread. Hopefully they don't take me off. I'm technically still media, I guess, here on Locked On Grizzlies. But I'm still on that thread, and I saw that email, and, of course, it gets posted on social media as well. Out due to injury. And I also saw, whether it was Keith from over at Fast Break Breakfast and Grits and Grinds, Matt Hardlicka, I think, posted about this as well. That section of Grizzlies Twitter, media, whatever you want to call us. The two things that people were most excited about, and I think this is a fair point to Michael, the two things coming out of last season's lost year, or, year of growth, whatever you want to call it, was Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson coming along and thinking that they could be productive members of a rotation for a team that is trying to compete. Those guys, at least for the start of the season, are both gone. Now, I think it's important to point out that Vince Williams Jr.'s timeline is much different than Gigi's, right? Vince Williams Jr. should almost certainly be playing by, the end of October. It sounds like it's a month-ish kind of situation with Vince Williams Jr., whereas Gigi, if we see him by Christmas, that's a realistic goal. So that's important to point out, but it is a setback for a guy that was planned on being in the rotation. And it means, you texted me this just because you like to give me a hard time. And in fairness, I give you a hard time about Derrick Rose. You said John Conchar rotation minutes incoming, which just made me kind of, it sent a shiver down my spine. But obviously the starting lineup probably won't change. You still have Brandon Clark, Santi Aldama, Luke Kennard. All those guys still exist. The question becomes who the 9th man, the 10th man, how they handle that during training camp is going to be really interesting to see. And for a team that has 2 open roster spots right now, that depth just got a little bit more in question, at least for the short term.
There's no question, Joe. It's going to be John Conchar. You know it. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear it. Well, go look at your boy Parker Fleming's advanced stats that he's put out of John Conchar, and we've talked about it a little bit on here.
He's white rice.
I'm not the biggest John Conchar supporter there is out there, but I am a little higher than him on that. Well, I don't even think high is the word to use when you talk about what Joe thinks of John Conchar. But anyways, look, John Conchar, you tell me, hey, what did you just say? Vince Williams, you think end of October? I say probably early November, and whatever the case may be in that range. John Conchar is going to play 5 games, 6, 7, 8 games maybe before Vince Williams is potentially available at some point in the regular season. That's fine. That's fine. Your first 2 games of the season against Utah and Houston, 2 teams that didn't make the playoffs last year and probably aren't projected, even though Houston's supposed to take a jump or whatever, not projected to make the playoffs this season, still made the play-in or whatever. But with all that being said, like, those are 2 teams, if the Grizzlies are who we think they are, they should at least beat one of them, whether Vince Williams, Gigi Jackson, those guys aren't available anyways. But with Vince Williams in particular, it is tough for him. I think it's more tough for Vince Williams than it is for the Grizzlies. And I say that because the Grizzlies can mask this for the couple regular season weeks that he'll probably miss, because he'll be reevaluated. It'll probably be somewhere late October, and then there will be some ramp up probably that has to happen, and then we'll see him back probably early November, somewhere around that time frame. Now, with that being said, he's not going to miss a lot of time. The Grizzlies should be fine. The role that he was going to play, probably 20 or so minutes off the bench. All you got to do is you're going to give the starter guys probably a couple more minutes, and you're going to knock down a John Conchar's minutes. So instead of maybe the 20 that Vince Williams would get, John Conchar probably gets 14, 15, something like that. And you live with it, it is what it is. Like, at the end of the day, Vince Williams wasn't going to be asked to come off the bench to score 15 points a game. He was going to be asked to come off the bench to knock down some 3-pointers and guard the best perimeter guy on the wing. Can John Conchar guard the best perimeter guy on the wing? I'm not as confident in it as the likes of Vince Williams, but John Conchar is not a bad defender. He's never been a bad defender. So with all that being said, I think it's manageable from that standpoint. Again, but with Vince Williams Jr. in particular, like, you think of those jumps, like with Gigi Jackson, I talked about it a little bit. This is year 1 to year 2, the second year jump that everybody talks about. This was Gigi Jackson's opportunity for that. Now he's not going to have, a regular second year where he gets to go through training camp, preseason, all the ramp up games and things like that. He's going to be thrown into the regular season, and the Grizzlies are going to be trying to win. And there's not going to be those preseason games where he says, this isn't working, or this combination with this guy. No, he's just going to have to go in and make it work, and he's going to have to adjust his game accordingly. And the same thing can be said for Vince Williams Jr. And I do think it's a little bit different with Vince because his game is tailor-made to fit around those guys. And he has this understanding in his mind. Yeah, I've never heard Gigi say these words, but Vince Williams has used words like dirty work and things like that. Like, he's prepared to do some of those things. He's prepared to be in there battling the bigger guys, get elbowed a couple times to go grab some rebounds to help out the bigs. He's prepared to guard the top wing scorers to give Ja and Dez a little bit of a break, on that end as well. So I think for him, it's more about the personal progression, like, because this is almost his year 1 to year 2 jump in terms of his NBA playing. His first year, he didn't really play in NBA that much. Second year, he played more than we probably expected, but that's where I am on it. At the end of the day, it is a thing where, Grizzlies fans, Joe, when they see that injury report and you see Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson, you start thinking, oh, here we go. Last year, it's already starting early, but at the same time, these are 2 manageable injuries early in the season for the Grizzlies. It's not the end of the world. It's not like you started last season, without Ja Morant. It could be worse. But I think it's manageable. I think the team, all of their goals are still ahead of them. That's why you build depth, right? That's why you have Jake LaRavia. That's why you have John Conchar. That's why you have Jalen Wells. Between those 3 guys, and all of them will monitor how it goes in the preseason, you have different types of players. All 3 of those guys are different type of players who should be able to at least be manageable in that stretch without Vince Williams.
Vince Williams Jr. is what Parker Fleming wants John Conchar to be. And, I text with Parker every once in a while. And, I said some words that I can't repeat on this family-friendly podcast. And
Oh,
because
Joe, you talk to Parker like that?
Because he tries to make John Conchar into something that he's not. John Conchar is white rice. Okay. You put like a Kung Pao chicken, you put a General Tso's chicken, a little beef lo mein, some beef and broccoli. I'm a little bit hungry, so I apologize for all the Chinese food references. But you put all that on top of it, and it adds to the meal, but only because it's absorbing what the other better foods around it are doing. That's John Conchar. He's not going to help. Like you talk about Vince Williams Jr. being expected to take open threes and that John Conchar can do that. Well, I would counter that and point out that John Conchar refuses to shoot threes. When he's wide open, he'll make an extra pass that isn't necessary. And,
if he talks at media day, I guarantee you that's going to be one of the things he says he's going to shoot the ball more.
Well, he said that last year too.
He did. That's my point.
Didn't actually happen, right? The carefully curated three-pointers, as Keith from Fast Break Breakfast likes to point out. We'll talk more about Conchar. You mentioned LaRavia. You mentioned Jalen Wells. Those are guys that are all going to get chances in that spot, especially in the preseason. We'll talk more about that on future episodes of Locked On Grizzlies. Let Damichael and I know on X. I'm at Joe Mullinax. He's at Damichael C. Hit us up. How are you feeling about what's going on with the Williams Jr. injury? How do you see that playing out in the rotation? We'll talk about that more as our time goes forward here on Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Big fans of FanDuel here at Locked On Grizzlies, and I know that you are as well, or at least you should be if you haven't given them a shot. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It is not just NBA time. It, of course, is NFL time. And if you get a hunch in the middle of a game, right, like me watching my 3-1 Washington Commanders, if I get a hunch that my boy Brian Robinson is going to break off a touchdown run, I can go in there and I can check out the latest stats, view live play up by play, and get so much more information to back up whatever potential choice I might make with FanDuel. And you want to make sure that you're on the same page when you're placing those bets. You want to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is place your first $5 bet. That's what's happening over at FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Go check them out and get started today. Damichael, on Friday's episode, which was a great show, by the way, partner, you talked about what comes next at the backup point guard position. And you've also talked about this on social media a little bit. And you brought up the idea of Marcus Smart in the backup point guard role. Now, I want to stress that this is a logical conclusion by you. Okay. I don't think that you're wrong in any way for assuming that's one of the ways the team might address this issue if they don't do another roster move outside, if they try to further address it from within.
Right.
I am going to say, and I'm curious as to your take because I didn't get a chance to talk about it Friday, I think that's terrifying because I've seen Marcus Smart for 2 years now, right? The last year in Boston, and then obviously last season with the Grizzlies, when he is the primary facilitator. So if he is the backup point guard for Ja Morant and they work the rotation in such a way that it's Smart that replaces Morant and he is the main expectation for facilitation of offense, even if it's against other reserves, I have reservations because I have seen Marcus Smart not be able to execute that for numerous teams within numerous situations. And you could easily argue the Boston Celtics had superior talent to the Memphis Grizzlies, and it didn't really work in Boston. So while it might be making chicken salad out of chicken, given the circumstances, I am nervous if, at media day today, if they talk up numerous times, whether it's Zach Kleiman, Taylor Jenkins, I know we'll talk a little bit more about a media day preview at the end of the show. If they're sitting there and saying we have total faith in Marcus Smart, that's going to make me roll my eyes a little bit because that's going to feel like we're in a tough spot and we're trying to talk ourselves into something that doesn't, for my viewing of the situation, that doesn't line up with reality.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it gives you, what I wanted to speak more on in the last episode was the fact that you have another experienced guy who can log minutes,
That's fair.
At that backup point guard spot.
He certainly has experience doing it.
He has a lot of experience doing it. And me and you both kind of agreed that, we'd rather not see him in that role. But a lot of times when I have these conversations, I'm thinking like, what would Taylor Jenkins think? And I think there's a good possibility. We'll see how the preseason goes because I think Scottie Pippen Jr. can win this thing. Like Scottie Pippen Jr. can win the backup point guard role. Smart can stay in the same role that he's been playing, that they've been projecting him to play this season, more off the ball, spot up shooting, selective secondary playmaker, which fits his game much better because he can make some nice passes. Like you saw last season, there were several times where Marcus Smart made good passes. I think for me, Joe, in particular, when you talk about the idea of putting Marcus Smart on the ball at point guard, it's not the passing. It's a couple other things. It's the turnovers potentially, and more than anything, it's the shot selection. And I say that because he's going to make good passes. I think his shot selection being that he's always, even when he was one of the top players coming out of high school and things like that, he was always this combo guard. Even at Oklahoma State, they wanted to play him at point guard some, and you kind of just felt like off the ball was a more natural fit for him. And I think when you talk about him being on the ball, with this Grizzlies team, we'll see how they try to mask it, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be asking him to play as much as he did in that situation a lot of times with Boston, but you're going to have guys like Desmond Bane. Like the rotations are going to be important too, because if you're asking him to play point guard and you're putting guys like John Conchar and Luke Kennard on the floor alongside of him, and he has to be your main, like this was the case last season, right? I'm playing devil's advocate here. Like a lot of times last season, you would see, not in the opening lineup, not when it was Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart in the game, but when they would pivot and he would be in the game with the bench and it would be Marcus Smart pretty much was the main creator in those lineups, it was terrible. It was terrible because he had to take those off the dribble tough shots that Boston fans kind of sighed at for years and kind of wanted him to go away from. But when we saw Ja get back, when we saw the team for that little stretch in December to January, or whatever the case may be, we saw Marcus Smart become more selective. So I'm not as concerned. Like we say, it's smart to bet on him. I'm willing to bet that he's going to be a much smarter shot taker, facilitator, all of those things in totality. My only question is, if guys get hurt or if guys aren't unavailable or if Taylor Jenkins puts him out there with the wrong combinations, you can't put him out there with guys who aren't willing to take shots. And that's the tough part about losing a guy like Gigi, because you would have a Gigi Jackson off the bench. You would have another guy who's a shot creator. Now it's going to be mainly a Desmond Bane or a Jaren Jackson Jr. who has to be in the lineup with Marcus Smart, or you're going to get some of that. But again, he's not the worst option in the world. I think it's a decent option to have overall. And like I alluded to probably about a week or so back, before I just kind of completely crap on the idea, I want to give the guy a fair shake. We saw him for 20 games last season. I do want to see him play more with the core Grizzlies guys, because we know point guards are the ones who have to learn where these guys like the ball, which big is going to be the guy who's going to do more of the short roll, who's going to be the big that rolls all the way to the rim, who's the pick and pop guy, who likes the corner three-pointer, who likes the catch and shoot shots, who's the guy who's easy to find off a pin down and curls and things like that. Like, he has to learn all these things about where Grizzlies players like the ball, how they like the ball, and their tendencies. That's the name of the game for a point guard. And, it shouldn't, like, he's been around these guys a long time now. So the preseason will be really telling. I think after the preseason, Joe, we'll have a clear idea whether it should be Scottie Pippen Jr. or Marcus Smart.
I would agree. I think that they're going to wait until they see some preseason games to make a decision on how they fill that 13th slot. They're not going to do it right away. At least that's my read on the situation. I keep coming back to the fact that he was a key cog in Boston. When that trade happened, as much as Boston was frustrated by the guy, it was almost like the Celtics Twitter wept, right? Yeah. If an online fan community could cry, I feel like they were crying. And they got first-round picks in addition to Kristaps Porzingis in the trade. You could pretty easily argue Boston won that trade by a landslide.
Oh, for sure.
And yet they were still bummed out that Marcus Smart was gone. And that is where I struggle, is he had that and still did not have success at what he might be asked to do in Memphis. Now, if they are able to keep him with a Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. Like if 25 games into the season, we check 3-man lineup data and the lead number receiver of minutes is Bane, Jackson Jr., and Smart, I think you're in a good place. If it's Smart having to run a lineup where he has to be that primary guy like you talked about, that's a massive concern for me. He has to have other options next to him or it's going to go terribly wrong, in my opinion. I want to stress that I'm betting on Marcus overall. I think that a John Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey starting 5 is going to be – this is going to be my bold prediction, spoiler alert, when I go on these preseason podcast previews. Those 5 guys are going to be the most efficient starting 5 in the NBA this season. That is my bold prediction.
Oh, wow.
Because, I believe in Smart as that dude that much. And I think if you have healthy and healthy and in tune and pissed off, ready to take on the world, John Morant, and you have Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. after the growth that they had, especially Jaren last season. And I'm betting on Zach Edey, who has dominated college basketball the last 2 years, being able to come in and be productive at an NBA level early on. I don't think it's that much of a stretch. But how the bench interacts with Smart is going to be really important, especially if they don't think Scottie Pippen Jr. is ready. We'll talk more about bold predictions and all that stuff later on down the road. For now, let Damichael and I know, how are you feeling about Marcus Smart? Do you think it's smart to bet on him or not? We'll talk more about that, of course, here on Locked On Grizzlies. But we want to make sure that after this episode of Locked On Grizzlies concludes, you are going and checking out Locked On Sports Today. It is remarkable work being done over by those guys at Locked On Sports Today, or at Locked On NBA, excuse me. Locked On NBA is where you should be going. From east to west, north and south, covering all the great aspects of the NBA, from the preseason to media days, the lead up to the regular season getting underway. Make Locked On NBA your second listen, your second watch, anywhere you get your podcast, just like Locked On Grizzlies, as we conclude. Make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. I love Gametime. I know Damichael loves Gametime. We love making memories with our friends and family and at so many different kinds of events, games, concerts, theater shows, comedy shows. Gametime is the place to go for those types of programs. And Gametime Picks is a brand new feature that makes getting tickets to favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Gametime does a phenomenal job with the toggling option as well with all-in pricing. Again, you have to turn it on and off, but it shows you the total up front, a way for you to save even more money and not have the surprise of major fees as you check out. You also get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy it, thanks to the best seat views there are in ticket purchasing. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. We'll get out of here on this. Damichael Cole, you are going to be there in person today. It is media day for the Memphis Grizzlies. This is a chance for Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the team, Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM. You're going to see lots of different Grizzlies players. Lots of, this is always the time of year where, Santi Aldama will have gained 20 pounds of muscle, and someone will still say that Jaren Jackson Jr. somehow grew.
Yep.
Yeah, Jaren Jackson Jr. somehow grew another inch, right? Like all these guys are going to come back from summer vacation and, be like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in terms of their development physically. I'm interested to hear things along the lines of like expectations for Zach Edey, right? Like, is my view of him in line with what they think he can do? Is what they foresee Santi Aldama's role, right, as a reserve? Do they see him as someone who could be in a mix to start next to Jaren, like some outlets on the national scale are also saying that's a possibility for the Grizzlies? I don't see that because I know the value of Jaren as a 4, but maybe Santi's success in the Olympics and he comes into Memphis and they see flashes of that. Maybe they want to tap into that. So how they approach the front court, obviously the point guard question I'm sure is going to be asked about a ton. They're going to paint narratives like John Morant's comeback and all those sorts of things. What are you most looking forward to sitting there in that room, having a chance to interact with all these guys again? What is Damichael Cole looking for going into media day later today?
This one's going to be different. It's going to be different than the last couple years because this is the media day of the ones that I've been here. I think this will be the third one, but it's my fourth season. But the third one that I've been at. Strictly business. That's the way I'm looking at it. There aren't a lot of narratives, in terms of like rivalries around the league. Like in the past, we talked about the Golden State stuff and, the Dylan Brooks stuff and all that stuff. All that's out of the window now. Nobody really cares about that stuff that much around here anymore. And quite frankly, on a national level, people don't care about the Grizzlies as much. That's just, it is what it is. And you don't hear a couple people out there hyping the Grizzlies up a little bit, but it's something that's going to have to come, throughout the season if they do the thing like they did a couple years ago and they went 56-26 and everybody started jumping on the wave or whatever. But with all that being said, when I say strictly business, we don't have a lot of contract talk to get into. Surely Jaren Jackson Jr. potentially could sign an extension before the season, but why in the world would he do that? Santi Aldama, that may be an interesting one on the extension talks. Jake LaRavia's option getting picked up and all that. But when you throw all that out of the window, I'm not going to say all, but for the most part, at this media day, strictly business. Usually Taylor Jenkins is probably the most boring person that you hear from, at these things, like if you're being honest. But me personally, I love talking to Taylor Jenkins. Love it. Because you're not going to get all the flashy, I guess some people would call it the clickbaity stuff and the fancy, the quotes from him. But you're going to get real good structural things on how the Grizzlies are going from a preparation standpoint. Remember last year he was talking about the offense going into gears, right? How the new assistant, Patrick St. Andrews, was trying to help the offense out. I want to know, okay, guess what? Did the injuries and all that, it kind of detoured the progress of that. So is he still giving the keys to the offense to Patrick St. Andrews? Or is it one of the new assistants? And it's like, Patrick St. Andrews, okay, you shift over to the right a little bit. This guy's he's the new lead offensive guy. That's what I want to hear about. I want to hear about, okay, like you just said, if Zach Edey, who is going to be, behind Zach Edey and Brandon Clark or the backup point guard spot, structurally rotation-wise, Marcus Smart guarding the, wings, is he going to get backup point guard minutes? Is that something you're willing to declare? We envision Zach Edey starting, but we haven't heard them say that. We've heard a lot of hype on him. Like, you never know what the plan is. So I want to see what the strictly business mindset is in terms of structurally what the Grizzlies have in mind. And quite frankly, all that leads to the Taylor Jenkins part of the presser. I want to hear a lot of what Taylor Jenkins has to say, about this team and about his assistant coaches. How he structures this assistant coaching staff will be very telling.
And obviously beyond media day, going into the actual practices coming up, I know you're traveling to Nashville to cover the team there in their training camp. How those practices are structured. You've talked about in the past, okay, this coach takes the lead guards. This coach takes the wings. This coach takes the bigs. With such overturn on his coaching staff, will his practice structure look a little bit different? Will the way that he organizes things be a little bit shifted? Any coach can get into a monotonous kind of situation where you do the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. And it can be difficult at times for players to grow when they're not being pushed outside of their comfort zone. Do you see more of that with these coaching changes? That's going to be something to keep an eye on, not just in media day, because he's probably not going to talk a ton about that, but you'll see that with your own eyes, partner, as you watch these practices. How that gets shifted is something that I'm going to be really interested in talking to you about over the next few days.
That's a good point.
That matters in terms of how the team, whether it's rotationally, schematically, how that practice looks might alter how they approach not just the preseason, but games themselves. Because once the season starts, and I know you know this better than anybody, they don't have as much time to practice. That's one of the crappy things about Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson getting hurt.
Yep.
This is the time where you install. This is the time where you work through scenarios. It becomes game plan and rest essentially once the actual regular season begins.
Yeah, the key word there is when you talk about the structuring of the staff is the development part.
Right.
I think it'll be similar at the end of the day. Like there will be coaches kind of, designated to certain groups, certain players, things like that. Like we heard a lot with the two guys that are out. Remember with Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson, two coaches were retained. We just talked about Patrick St. Andrews. The other one was Anthony Carter. Anthony Carter played a big role in the seasons that Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson had this past year. So it was zero surprise that he was retained. But where these other coaches kind of fill in, I think they're going to be designated to certain groups, certain players. And then there are other coaches, who are going to be more in charge of like scouting, film work, analytical stuff, things like that, all that breakdown stuff that a lot of people probably don't really care about. But it is important to the success of this team. I mean, I could tell you there were so many times over the past couple of years where players would say, man, this coach pointed this out to me. Or with Gigi Jackson, everybody knows, like, why is he shooting the ball much better from three-point range? He's never shot this well from three-point range in his life. And it was Anthony Carter kind of emphasizing the idea of getting more arc on his shot. Again, something that's not fun to talk about. It's not real nice headline stuff there, but it is crucial to his development.
It matters a ton, and I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to watch it play out. Again, you said it, only two coaches retained, so almost an entirely new coaching staff for the Grizzlies. How Jenkins deploys those guys is going to be fascinating to watch unfold. It's been fascinating to have this episode unfold with you, dear listener, dear viewer. Thank you so much for being with us here on this installment of Locked On Grizzlies. Tomorrow, we're going to have all of the Media Day content to talk about, as I mentioned a moment ago. Damichael Cole will be there in person, in the flesh, in Memphis, Tennessee, covering not just for Commercial Appeal, but for Locked On Grizzlies. His day job is Commercial Appeal, but we'll get some quotes, I'm sure, and some things we can discuss on our next episode. Looking forward to following your coverage at Damichael C over at the Commercial Appeal, and we'll talk about all the different storylines, if there are any. Like you said, it should be a strictly business kind of theme, but Ja Morant speaks, it's usually headline news, and I'm curious to hear what he and other Grizzlies have to say going into a pretty important season, especially for Taylor Jenkins.
Yeah, especially for Taylor Jenkins. Ooh, I like you. Just gonna leave us out on that joke, especially for Taylor Jenkins. You just gonna leave. You just gonna end the show saying that. I
gotta lead into the next episode. You gotta.
I know what you just did right there. I don't know if everybody just caught that, especially with Taylor Jenkins. Because why would he say that? Why not especially with Ja Morant? Why not? Especially
why would he do that?
We got Joe Windhorse over here right now. So,
God, don't call me.
But yeah, I think you're on the money there. Everyone's going to want to hear from Ja. People are going to want to hear from Zach Edey as well, and Luke Kennard, and a lot of guys have been working out together. So it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be exciting, and we're going to have all the breakdown for you, not just tomorrow, but throughout the week here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA as your second listen, your second watch today. Anywhere you get podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you can find Locked On NBA. Go give them a listen or watch. Small town feel, big time NBA-wide coverage. Locked On NBA is fantastic. Give them a shout after you're done with us here at Locked On Grizzlies. Anywhere you can get a podcast, you can find Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, making us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time an episode drops. We're almost up to 4,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thanks to everybody that's subscribing over there. We want to get to that number by the start of the season for sure, but make sure you're subscribing on the audio side as well. Make sure you never miss an episode of Locked On Grizzlies. For Damichael, I'm Joe. We will catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. It is the season, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to get excited. Time to lock back in. NBA basketball will be here before you know it. See you tomorrow.